How did Rome fall? Historians have been debating that question, well, moving on 2,000 years now. But everyone agrees one of the reasons is pretty obvious. The Roman military, its legions, became dominated by non-citizens who, in the end, because they weren't loyal to Rome, turned against Rome's citizens. So knowing that as we do, consider this series of facts. This country has been flooded with tens of millions of illegal aliens. At least 7.2 million, that's the official number, have entered since Joe Biden became president. That number is greater than the population of 32 states. So what do we do with these people? Do we deport them? No, not according to the U.S. Congress. Here's the idea.
There is no higher honor than serving your country in uniform.
And that honor could be extended to migrants under a new bill introduced by Hudson Valley Congressman Pat Ryan. Called the Courage to Serve Act, this bill would offer qualified and vetted migrants an expedited path to citizenship if they serve in the military. According to Ryan, last year the military services collectively missed recruiting goals by roughly 41,000 recruits, leaving some crucial positions unfilled.
If there are folks with the courage to raise their right hand, take an oath to protect and defend our Constitution, and put their lives on the line for this country, then they sure as hell deserve the opportunity to be citizens in the United States of America.
Ooh, Pat Ryan lecturing us on what it means to be an American, as if he would know. But consider this for a second. The military can't meet its recruiting goals. Now, who forms the basis of our fighting forces? Well, sorry to say it, but white men always have. So the U.S. military has been attacking white men by name. We're against you, white men. And so it turns out lots of white men don't want to join the military anymore. Who could have predicted that? So there is a problem getting American citizens who are born here to defend their country. Now, in a normal nation, you would pause and ask, what are we doing wrong that young Americans don't want to defend their own country? Maybe we should change and improve. But not in this country, not with this Congress. The idea is, let's allow an invasion of the country, not use the military to stop it, and then populate the military with the people who are invading the country and hope for the best. Wow. If this ever does become a police state, if you're ever ordered to obey at the point of a gun, this is the way it's going to happen. Maybe not. Colonel Douglas Macgregor seemed like a man to ask about this. He's a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, the commander of the last tank battle in American history, and the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. He joins us now. Doug, thanks so much for coming on. Now, I don't want to jump to a lot of conclusions about this, but since you are, in addition to all the other things I mentioned, a military historian, assess, if you would, the wisdom of allowing people to invade your country and then handing them automatic weapons.
You know, when I listen to the comments coming out of the Senate or the House, let alone the White House, I'm sometimes reminded of that famous statement in Vietnam, in order to save the village, we had to destroy it. Yes. I get the impression that's the plan in Washington. We have to destroy the country in order to save it.
Clearly.
At least, I guess, from the standpoint of everybody in Washington, whatever happened before they arrived was wrong, and the brave new world must be built in the future on the ruins of the past. And they're doing a pretty good job of trying to make that work. The military is a good example of it. And military institutions take decades to build. They're resilient in most cases because of the human capital that replenishes them on a routine basis. We're having problems recruiting for a very simple reason. People that have been through this over the last 20, 30 years have said, what are we doing? What's the point of being in the military? We go to these places, they look around in Iraq or they look around in Afghanistan and they say, there's nothing here. What am I doing here? Oh, well, you're building democracy. And people burst out laughing. It's nonsense. Of course it's nonsense. How is this defending America? And I think that's a huge part of the problem. If you were to ask 100,000 men, white, black, or otherwise, who call themselves Americans, what are you ready to do? They're ready to defend the United States. But they don't see much evidence that we're defending the United States. If anything, we've walked away from that in favor of what? Defending Ukraine or defending parts of the Middle East? This is not what we signed up for. And I think that's a huge issue as well.
I wonder, though, what the effect on our domestic politics, our domestic life will be. I mean, when you're at West Point, I imagine you saw your job as a newly minted Army officer defending the United States from its enemies abroad. But the DOD is playing, I think, an unprecedented role in the domestic life of our country. You saw it on January 6th. You see it in the censorship efforts being led by DOD. So should we be a little nervous about the idea of arming foreigners, lawbreakers, people who've broken federal law, and handing them weapons? Like, why would we be crazy to worry that that might be used against us?
Well, if you were playing for the Eagles and suddenly you were fired, and the manager of the Eagles decided to hire the third string team that works in Dallas, Texas for the Dallas Cowboys, then you went into the game and discovered that the third stringers from the Dallas Cowboys are helping the Dallas Cowboys win, you'd be pretty upset. Well, that's effectively what these people are deciding to do. None of these people are Americans. We know from having interviewed them, they have no aspiration to be Americans. What they aspire to is to get into the consumption machine, get the ticket of entry, the free check, the free phone, the free transportation tickets, the free food, the free medical care, and the free this, the free that. That's why they're coming. And people say, well, they deserve this. No, they don't. They haven't worked for any of it. In the meantime, what do Americans get? You know, we have a force right now that can't defend anything anywhere overseas very successfully. Look at the failed military operations we've had for over 20 years, and look at the border. No one brings it up. No one's even trying. No one seems to care. You know, I think the largest problem is that Washington is this ideological bubble, and everyone decides that anyone who doesn't agree with them, that the world has to be refashioned in some new image that exists only in their minds, and that anybody who disagrees with them is by definition a criminal and has to be treated as such. What better solution than finding people who have no connection to the American people, arming them, and then sending them out to oppress us? Sounds like a great solution.
I mean, that's a mercenary army by definition.
Of course, and mercenaries fight for money. They fight for the people that pay them. But there's always a problem with this. And you mentioned that at the outset. You talked about the Roman Empire in the 4th century. The Goths were admitted to the Roman Empire, in part because the Romans were no longer capable of keeping them out. And then they decided, well, we'll use the Goths as soldiers. And essentially, they took Gothic armies and put them under Roman command. Eventually, the Goths decided, you know, we really ought to be in charge after all. They marched on Rome, defeated the Roman legions, and conquered Rome. And that was the end of the Roman Empire. That's effectively what you're talking about doing, because these people aren't going to answer to an American officer who speaks English, who talks about the country and defending it, defending the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They don't know anything about that. They could care less. So you're talking about the ruination of the entire military establishment, but you're starting with the most important institution. And I say this not because of parochial reasons, but because the regular army is the final line of defense inside the United States for the American people and the state. So you're setting the conditions for its total destruction.
Thank you for bringing us back to the obvious, and that's exactly right. It's the essential institution in any country, of course, and people who seek political power understand that much better than the rest of us do, I think. But why would someone like Pat Ryan, who I think is a man of low character and low ability, but did serve in the U.S. military, why would he be so in favor of this?
He seems to be part of this group in Washington that is intent on denationalizing us. It goes back to the statement at the beginning, you know.